Welcome in, everyone, to Let's Talk Utes. Utes are coming off a 38-21 win in Logan over the Utah State Aggies. Isaac Wilson gets a start for an injured Cam Rising. Let's just jump right into the reaction. Landon, what was your thoughts about this game?
This game took about 10 to 15 years off of my life. Being down on the road with a true freshman quarterback, dude, this was more in doubt than I thought it was going to be close, but this was way more in doubt than I would have hoped.
Yeah, it was it was definitely a frustrating first quarter to say the least. I think my gripes with Ludwig in the past came to fruition. I think on that first drive where we ran it up the gut twice, and just put our freshman in a bad situation. On a third and long. So from that point on, and then obviously we gave the ball to Utah State, and they started pushing down the field, scoring tutties, and I think we were down 14-3 at one point. So very interesting game. I'm glad a scare came early in the season. But yeah.
I was really impressed with how composed Isaac looked when he was kind of given the full playbook. He looked so much better than he did first 2 weeks. And it showed, as he sees, 20 for 33 is impressive, especially for a freshman coming into the Utah offense.
Yeah, I think that was the key takeaway for me, is clearly at the beginning of the game, it felt like Utah didn't want to give anything away. They wanted to roll into Logan, get a win, not really show anything, come out healthy, get ready for Oklahoma State the next week. I think that the fact that Utah State jumped out to that early 14-3 lead really made it so that they actually had to put something out there. They actually had to do something resembling a competent offense with enough passing to keep the defense honest. And like Ethan said, Isaac Wilson, I thought, was spectacular. The first quarter was obviously shaky, but as soon as we started, getting him into a rhythm, doing some 5-yard curls to Dorian Singer, an easy out route he can hit, I really thought he showed out. He made a couple throws that I'm not even sure, Cam could have made with Wilson's arm strength. Like that one to Money Park along the sidelines. That was elite stuff right there.
Well, especially with him looking off the safety, like eyeing Keithy that whole play. And as soon as Money got open, switching that and just throwing that dagger to him on that fade. It was super impressive. And I was a little concerned about the drops that Utah had, but just thinking about it, Isaac just has a stronger arm than Cam. He's throwing fastballs while Cam's throwing changeups, and it just shows. Isaac has incredible arm talent for an 18-year-old, and that's nothing against Cam. That's just Isaac's specialty there, and it kind of showed out. Maybe take a little bit off those on some of those throws, just to allow them to those tight ends, those wide receivers to catch the ball maybe a little bit more effectively, or is that on them? I don't know. But I really thought Isaac was super impressive.
Yeah, in a little bit of a different vein, I'm super glad that Utah got tested like this on the road early. Historically, Utah has struggled to win on the road, and so I'm glad that we got into a road game, got a little discombobulated, got down 2 scores, had to really lock in, focus in, and come back from a deficit. I think that's going to bode very well, especially for this next week when they're going to be playing in a much more difficult road environment. I think it built up a bit of resilience within the team.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I think this game honestly played out as ideally as it could have. Obviously, I would have liked Cam to get some reps, just because I am a little concerned. He still hasn't played a full game of football in all 3 games combined, less than 4 quarters. So a little concerning there. Obviously, when you have a veteran coming back that hasn't taken a snap in 2 years, he looked great when he was playing, but it's always of concern. But I think Isaac Wilson really proved himself this game. He's a talented young dude, and he honestly he looks very elevated from even Bryson Barnes last year. I think that's obvious. But even Brandon Rose and many of the others quarterbacks that we've had in the system, prior to Cam and during Cam his tenure. He looks like he has a grasp of the offense, which is impressive because I guess he's a true freshman.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because all through fall camp, the coaches were saying, like there's pretty significant separation between Wilson and, QB3. That's Rose or Huard. And everyone was kind of like, really? Like that seems like crazy. Utah's offense is notoriously hard to learn. And for a true freshman to come in and beat guys out with multiple years of experience, Brandon Rose in the system, Sam Huard not in the system, I think that's impressive. And I think you saw kind of that separation today because like Connor was saying, I don't think any quarterback besides Cam has like had as much command as the offense as Wilson showed versus Utah State and, since, Huntley.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at last year, Wilson had a better statistical game than any quarterback last season for Utah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about Mekhi Bernard. Mekhi Bernard, obviously, I feel like has taken the RB1 role, pretty firmly, I would say. He's the one that's getting the most carries. He's the one that's producing the most. And he's clearly the one the coaches trust the most. I thought he had an incredible game, and, he was a big reason for Utah being able to pull away.
That big run from him when he had like 5 stiff arms on the defensive backs against Utah State was super impressive. That was one of the highlights of the season so far, definitely. And I think 17 carries for him is a perfect spot. It gives him enough where he's super effective, but also limits him risking getting hurt, because that's always been the gripe with Micah or Mekhi. I always say his name wrong. I can't remember. But Bernard, it's always been the gripe for Bernard, and he's always been hurt. He has the talent to be RB1, but he just gets hurt. He can't take those big reps. So far this year, he's really, really shown out, and he's been incredible, and I can hope that it continues this way. But I think 17 carries a game for him is an awesome spot, and I think he'll shine with those reps.
Well, on paper, he's literally better than Ollie Gordon this year. He's literally having a better season. So, yeah, I completely agree. He's showing out, and I think he's clearly separated himself as RB1. Witt hasn't explicitly said that, but the way the reps are trending, I think we all kind of see the writing on the wall with that one. Another bright spot in this one was Caleb Lohner for me. He had another awesome grab in the end zone, and he also blocked another field goal. Dude is just a freak athlete, and he's just making plays all over the field. I think we're so lucky to have him. And Witt said this was light work for him. He's going to get more integrated into the offense as the year goes on. That's a direct quote. So, yeah, he's one of the guys I'm really excited to watch develop.
Yeah, I really feel like the field goal block aspect has been totally underplayed because like he changes every field goal attempt. Like I honestly think that will be like one of the most unique skills that like Utah fans will look back on for years and just remember, kind of what a menace he was on that field goal block unit.
Dude, like, because we're on pace to block a field goal a game. That changes the outlook of your season.
Mm-hmm.
When it allows guys like Van Fillinger, Logan Fano to make those crazy athletic plays, going crazy, trying to jump the line and stuff like that, because you have a guy like Lohner in the backfield jumping 40 inches off the ground at 6'8", tipping it every single time. And so it's just one of those things where it just creates so much more opportunities for others to do some impressive things just because he's there doing great. It's like Rudy Gobert on defense. It allows other people to take risks because he's back there. He's protecting the rim. Caleb Lohner's back there. He's protecting the field goal because he's jumping up that high. It's crazy.
Let's talk a little bit about the defense. I think the defense was pretty underwhelming for most people here. 21, not expected at all. My lock of the week last week was under 7.5 points for Utah State. I just didn't see how they were going to score, but props to that coaching staff. They came out with a really good strategy and really like maximize their risk reward, which got them, in the good spot to score what they did.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I give a ton of credit to Utah State's coaching staff for this one. They came in with an unreal game plan, like that hurry up deep shot offense. They were not running that before. It was something specifically they thought that would work well against Utah. And it did work very well against Utah. They were able to score 21. which is very impressive, especially considering the talent deficit. And I also think, not to get too far ahead, but I think it was a good preparation for next week.
Yeah, I think on the defense specifically, I didn't think we played terribly. Obviously, we didn't have the best game, but dude, I mean, you kind of had some Bryson Barnes USC magic going from last year. He was throwing the balls up to these receivers, and they were just coming down with the most insane catches you'd ever see. Like it's just one of those things where there's only so much you can do. The coverage most times was pretty good. I know there were some busted coverages, but like I thought for the most part, like our corners and safeties played pretty decent. They were gashing us pretty good in the first quarter, but even throughout the game, I mean, there were just some straight prayers from Bryson that were just getting answered. The receivers were pulling him in somehow. I mean, even that. I mean, Smith Snow not an awesome pick, but it's like the fact that that was even like a ball for the wide receiver is just crazy. You know what I'm saying? And there were some just like sideline tiptoe catches that like Utah State shouldn't be making those plays, but they were, and it's just kind of part of the game. It was a little frustrating to watch, because you kind of felt powerless. But I thought overall the defense, it was a great week for the defense to kind of get punched in the mouth, because I think we're going to come out a lot stronger. I think Scouty's going to have the boys fired up.
I mean, kind of taking off both of your points with Connor and Landon is this is Oklahoma State. Exactly how they run. Like, thanks Utah State. Thanks for doing us a favor, letting us have in-game reps of how Oklahoma State will play for next week. And yet as you saw in like the second half, they only scored 7 points, and that's notorious for Scally. Give him a quarter, give him a half. He's going to lock down your team. He's going to figure out what's working, and he's going to take it away. I think what was really impressive for me was the two young cornerbacks getting the 2 interceptions, and Smith Snowden, obviously Connor talked about it, that crazy athletic play, and then Calhoun reading Bryson Barnes like a book and taking right out of the air. Both plays super impressive. I think the defensive backs, it's concerning because obviously they're so young, but they have the talent to really be special for Utah. And I think the reason why this defense struggled, especially in the beginning, is we were missing some guys. I mean, Crenny Reed's out. Connor O'Toole hardly played. Of course, everyone's hurt, but those guys, they're key pieces to Utah's defense, and it's hard to kind of replace them there. And I think Utah kind of figured out a way to do that in that second half.
Yeah, I think the defense was even slightly worse. 21 points suggest, because Utah State got 385 yards. That would be one of the higher totals that Utah gave up all of last year as far as defense goes. And they also had 2 missed field goals and 2 interceptions when they were on the plus side of the field. 1 interception in the end zone by Smith Snowden in a crazy play, and then 1 interception at like the 15-yard line by Cameron Calhoun. And so like they moved the ball on Utah. It definitely was not an acceptable performance. Like Ethan said, missing Karene Reed and Connor O'Toole, I think makes a huge difference. Karene Reed especially. I think we saw even in the Baylor game when Karene Reed went out, all of a sudden Baylor had a lot more space to operate and more things opened up to them. So yeah, I am pretty concerned about the defensive performance, but I do trust Scally to adjust and figure it out and, see where they went wrong and scheme for that next time.
Yeah, another little tidbit from the press conference, just really quick before we move on. Witt actually mentioned that they tried a lot of new personnel packages and schemes just because Bryson knows the defense so well. He was on the Utes team for multiple years, and those things just weren't really working, and so they had to go away from them in the second half, where our defense started playing much better. And so that's just another little bit of information to add to this picture.
Well, and I think like guys like that were taking over for Karene Reed and Connor O'Toole, they just looked more comfortable in the second half. Like Jonathan Hall, especially, moving from safety to middle linebacker. Like this was his first real test there, and he impressed me in the second half. His first half he was a little sloppy, his coverages weren't great, but he really shined in his open field tackling and created a lot of pressure when he was rushing the field quarterback as well. So I'm excited to see what he can do later out in the season, especially if Creddy is hurt for longer than a few weeks.
Anyone have any final thoughts about the Utah State game before we move on to previewing Oklahoma State?
Nothing for
No?
me.
I'm just glad we can never talk about this pig farm ever again.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move on to Oklahoma State. So Oklahoma State has played an interesting non-conference schedule. They first played South Dakota State, which is one of the best FCS teams, if not the best FCS team. Then they played Arkansas, beat them 39-31 in double OT in a game where they had to come way back. And really were not playing well at all in the first half and give up 650 yards. And then they destroy the Tulsa Golden Hurricane. You know, Alan Bowman throws 5 touchdowns, nearly 400 yards with only 31 attempts. So kind of a roller coaster, I would say, start to the season. What are you guys' initial thoughts on Oklahoma State in this matchup coming in Stillwater?
Yeah, I'd like to focus a little bit more on the Arkansas game for me because I think there's a lot more things you can learn from that. Tulsa was just like a talent mismatch. They handled business. Well done. You know, it's like it's always a good win when you win big. Arkansas was interesting. Their defense looked very bad throughout it. They had to have a few turnovers from Arkansas as well as a few other plays go their way, a pick six. They had to play from behind there, and they were able to come back, but it was definitely in doubt. The main takeaway I would have was how much this year they've struggled to run. Ollie Gordon, I don't even know exactly what he's averaging per attempt, but I believe it's below 3.5 yards, which for a player that talented, you'd expect a lot more. And I think a lot of those issues stem from their offensive line and their inability so far to run block.
It's exactly 3.5.
3.5, there it is.
Yeah, I think I like to look at that Arkansas game as well, just because I feel like that's the most balanced matchup there was. You know, like Landon said, you can look at the Tulsa game, you can look at the you know, the FCS game, and you know they're valuable. It's good film, but to be honest, you know, playing an SEC team is always going to show more on tape than really any other game will. The thing that sticks out to me is JJ going for 150 yards against you know, their defense, 3 touchdowns on 24 carries. And like Landon was saying, Ollie Gordon just wasn't efficient that game. 17 carries for 49 yards and a touchdown. It doesn't appear that the offensive line is getting a lot of push up front, which is concerning if you're an Oklahoma State fan, just because you have a Heisman level running back that just really can't seem to get it going, and hasn't been able to get it going this season. Alan Bowman only threw for a touchdown. He also threw for an interception. Didn't have a terrible game, 27-48 for 330 yards. But yeah, I mean, as you start to break down the rushing versus the passing yards, and you know, a lot of the Arkansas had 4 turnovers. You know, while Oklahoma State had 0. So I mean, there's a lot that went into this game. Obviously, it went into double OT, so there's a lot of factors that made this game a lot maybe closer than it looked, because I know Arkansas was running away with it at one point. But yeah, just a very interesting matchup.
Alan Bowman's so interesting because statistically, you look at his stats and like, oh, this guy's great. He's a really good quarterback. 967 yards, 8 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions, and 80 QBR. Like, that's impressive. But then you kind of dive in a little bit more. It's like the dude's already thrown 112 times this season. He's already. It's just super interesting to me. He's just one of those quarterbacks. It's like you watch him, just not as good as his stats say, and it's just weird. That's not typical, at least in my mind, my experience watching football.
Yeah, I think the guy that he kind of reminds me the most of, not as far as like really like talent, but as far as style, is kind of like a Mac Jones type player. Mac Jones had really, really great receivers and obviously played for an Alabama team that was just dominant, you know. Mac Jones, his best skill was, you know, having a good football IQ and being able to get the ball out to the receivers. I feel the same way about Bowman. I don't think he's someone that's really gonna, you know, dice you up at all levels, but I think he's like more than serviceable when with how good Oklahoma State's receivers are. I think he can get the ball to them and, you know, run an effective offense, which is why they've stuck with him for so long, when maybe they had options to get someone with more talent per se, but maybe less system knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also interesting to think about the Arkansas game because they really did struggle against Halen Green, Oklahoma State's defense. And don't get me wrong, like Cam isn't as mobile as he used to be, but he's still a person that can run the ball quite effectively. He's very smart about when he needs to run, and Taylor Green is very similar to that, at least from my experience watching him play. And he kind of diced them up. I mean, 416 yards, a touchdown. I think he had a rushing touchdown, if I believe correctly. If I want to, no, he did not. But he ran for 61 yards and 18 carries. He did really well, and I think that could be something to watch out for. Like, with Cam being a little bit mobile, again, not as mobile as Taylor Green and not as mobile as years past, but that's something that could be key for them, for Utah to take advantage of.
Yeah, like Arkansas had 650 yards of offense on Oklahoma State. Honestly, if not for the 4 turnovers, they would have had so many more points. Like, even compare that to the Tulsa game. Oklahoma State had 560 yards of offense, which is a ton. Like, they blew them out. They scored 45 points. Them allowing 650 yards of offense is extremely concerning, because that's not just like one unit was playing bad or there was a couple broken plays. That's like they could run, they could pass, they were consistently moving the ball, they were sustaining drives. The weakness of Oklahoma State is 100% the defense.
I mean, giving them props, they won that game because that defense created 3 turnovers. Like, as much as like that defense did struggle, 648 yards is insane. But getting those 3 turnovers, that won them that game. And so, I mean, it's the definition of bend, don't break. They were bending to the point where they were about to snap into 1,000 pieces, but they didn't. And they ended up winning that game. It's just one of those things where that's why Oklahoma State's ranked 13th in the country. They were, I think, did they move up at all? Anyways, they're a top 15 team. They handle business, which is, it's impressive, but it's also concerning giving up that many yards.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the offense. We've kind of hit the defense quite a bit. The offense, I do think, is really good. I do think that the inability to run the ball so far has been pretty surprising. I don't really think anyone would have seen that coming, especially with Ollie Gordon. It just seems like the offensive line is really struggling in run block and doing much better in pass protection, which is why they've thrown the ball so much and done it effectively.
Yeah, I think that they have a problem where, unfortunately, running back is probably the easiest position to scheme out. Even if you have a good running back, like, the only way you can't scheme the running back out is if you have like a dominant offensive line and dominant running back. But if your running back's good but the offensive line isn't elite, you can just stack the box. There's a lot of different things you can do as a defense to scheme Ollie Gordon's impact away and then just make Bowman beat you, which is what it seems like the game plan has been for most people playing them.
Yeah, I think if you make Bowman beat you through the air, which unfortunately for Arkansas kind of did happen, but it took them 2 overtimes to do it. I think you're winning. I think you're in a great spot because Alan Bowman, he's played the same amount of years in college that Cam Rising has, and although he's pretty talented, he's not a great quarterback, and he certainly is pretty turnover prone. I think last year, I can't remember the exact ratio of touchdowns to interceptions he had, but I know it wasn't great. And as far as efficiency goes, he actually played pretty efficiently against Tulsa, but it is Tulsa. Like I said, I think if we're getting Alan Bowman to throw for 45, 50 pass attempts per game and Ollie Gordon's getting stuffed, if the offensive line can't, create push, I think that's where you want to be as a defense. And I think if you're doing that, you give yourself a great shot.
To kind of talk about the Alan Bowman turnover to touchdown ratio, it was 15 touchdowns to 14 interceptions, so quite turnover prone.
Yeah, I think the receiver group is maybe the strongest group on their team. Stribling, Rashad Owens, and then Brennan Presley. Those guys are 3 really, really, really good receivers. And especially going up against, a Utah secondary that is young, lost their cornerback to Keenan Johnson to injury. I think that is an area where Oklahoma State definitely has a decided advantage, and they're probably going to go to that pretty frequently.
I agree. I would imagine Oklahoma State's game plan coming into this game is going to be very pass focused. I think they'll, of course, try and establish the run when you have someone like Ollie Gordon. I personally don't think they're going to be successful with that, and I think it's going to come down to who's making plays downfield. Is Utah's secondary going to play some good defense, or are their receivers going to be able to just come up with those jump balls?
Yeah, I will say the Utah State game, like Landon was saying, was very reminiscent of what I think this game's going to be like. Rashul Faison, I think, was the running back for Utah State, and he reminded me a lot of Ollie Gordon last year.
Same.
Very explosive guy, and he was able to, when he found gaps, he hit them hard. In the yards after contact, he was a very impressive guy. I wouldn't be mad if Utah, came
Yeah.
knocking on his door for, with some NIL, but. No, he was super impressive. I think, the concerning thing was in that first quarter, Utah was getting gashed. Utah State was able to establish the run somewhat. And, I think if Oklahoma State is able to establish the run and they're passing on you, if their offense is completely open, especially with Utah's injuries that we have in the secondary right now, it won't be a pretty picture. So I think as long as we can make them one-dimensional one way or the other, I think we put ourselves in a great spot.
Kind of talking about how what this game reminds me of. It kind of gives me the USC championship game vibes when USC was up 17-3 to start the game. I could see Oklahoma State coming out and scoring quite a lot of points against Utah. But again, I just trust Scally to make those adjustments. I mean, Utah State isn't someone that I want to toot my horn on and say oh, look at how good they played in the second half. But they were gashing us in the first two quarters. It did not look pretty at all. But Scally adjusted the defense. That's what he does. And they couldn't do anything. They scored 7 points. I mean, if I remember correctly, it was Faison didn't do much in the second half. Bryson Barnes threw another interception. I don't think he had another passing touchdown. It was one of those things where we were able to really limit their success. And the same thing that's happened against Baylor. Baylor was the whole game, and their game plan was excellent. I feel like if Utah goes out there and does what they can do, it's going to be a really impressive outing. But the problem is we are injured. We are young. It's can Bowman, can Presley, can Owens create those big plays that Oklahoma State is keen on. And can Ollie Gordon get going? That's the question mark. And I think Utah could stop them for sure, but it's going to be hard.
I do think the Oklahoma State style, like Connor said previously, does lend itself well to beating Utah's defense. Utah's defense is one with quite a lot of, complicated verbiage and complicated play calls. Scally is often tinkering up to the last moment, with matchups and where he wants people to be, kind of like a chess master. When you go hurry up, you take away a huge amount of that, and players have to be really on top of it. They have to be really on top of their assignments and know exactly where they're going to go. And so I think that is something that plays into Oklahoma State's hands, especially with the injuries to Karene Reed and Connor O'Toole, who are both likely not expected to play. Utah hopes they do, obviously, but those are two of the best players on the defense. And so, relying on, less talented, more inexperienced players and Oklahoma State running that hurry up offense that they are so comfortable with, that they're so comfortable executing, I think could lead to some points in this game. Any other thoughts on Oklahoma State right now before we move on to the next slide?
Not really, not for me.
Nope.
Okay, let's move on. Landon, do you have a key matchup that you're looking for? It can be one that you're
Yeah, the key matchup I'm going to be looking at here, it's probably the most obvious one, and we've brushed on it a little bit. Utah's DBs versus Oklahoma State's wide receivers. I think this is where the game is going to be decided. If Oklahoma State isn't able to get receivers open, if they're not coming down with those jump balls, it's going to be a long night for Oklahoma State. Conversely, I think their best way of scoring is going to be throwing those jump balls that they love to throw downfield to Rashad Owens, those big receivers. If they're able to consistently do that, I mean, it doesn't really matter what the rest of your scheme is if your DBs just can't guard them.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think the key for this, the biggest key for me is Landon Martin versus Ollie Gordon. We've said it before that Oklahoma State really hasn't had the opportunity and really hasn't had the the structure on the offensive line yet to generate much run push. Obviously, it's only week 4, so things could develop. But I think with Karene Reed out, Landon Barton's going to really have to step up to make sure that Ollie Gordon can't get going, because if he does, I think it's a nightmare scenario for Utah, because the run opens the pass and the pass opens the run. And with their hurry up offense, like Tanner was mentioning, it's going to be really difficult to make adjustments on the fly. And a lot of what Scally likes to scheme, like Tanner was saying, kind of flies to the Bayside.
What about you, Ethan? Do you have a matchup you're looking for?
Honestly, for me, it's probably the offensive line for Oklahoma State for Utah's defensive line. It's one of those, probably the 1 and 2 for both teams. Utah's best group is probably the defensive line, and then Oklahoma State's either wide receiver or offensive line, in my opinion, is their best group. Can they protect Bowman to allow Landon's key to happen? Can Rashad Owens, can Brandon Pesci get downfield? Can the offensive line protect Bowman? Can the offensive line create holes for Ollie Gordon? I think that will all go down to, can Utah create pressure? Can Oklahoma State limit that pressure? That's the matchup I probably want to watch a lot this week.
I definitely think Oklahoma State has been quite a bit better protection than they have run block. I think that has been, the reason why they've been leaning on the pass so heavily is because that's what's working for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have an extremely good scheme that makes it easy to protect as well. Bowman's best attribute is getting the ball out quickly. Sometimes it can be a negative because he does force the ball into covered receivers, but he doesn't take many sacks. He just gets the ball out so quickly because they're either running like some sort of RPO with a slant, or it's one of those streak/fades where he throws the ball so high in the air, he can lead the receiver by so much. It's just so hard to get to him before he's released the ball.
No, I don't know how he hasn't thrown so many picks on that, dude. It's so
interesting.
He
does. Truth. He had 15
it's true.
touchdowns, 14 picks
yeah.
last year.
But I do think this year, he's been much better at keeping the ball clean, because I think they simplified. Instead of 3-step drops, having to read the field, kind of more of a Utah pro style offense, like they're making his decisions very easy. He has a couple of keys and he looks at those 1 or 2 keys and then he decides the play. Makes it much harder to have turnovers when it's that simple.
I mean, it's worked so far.
Yeah.
Okay. I also think I think that later in the year, more turnovers could also rear their head. They haven't really played. Arkansas is the only team that really had a talent similar enough to theirs, and he did end up throwing a pick in that game on a jump ball. I wouldn't say for sure that the turnover issue is better than last year. So far it has been, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to throw a decent amount of picks.
Mm-hmm.
I think if there's any defense that can do that can create turnovers, it's going to be Utah's for sure.
Agreed.
It will be interesting to see if Utah adjusts anything, because their playbook before has kind of been stop the run, but like allow quick passes, almost like a bend, don't break style, which I think plays right into Oklahoma State's hands. So I'll be interested to see like what adjustments they make there. The key for me, I'll go with one with Utah's offense versus Oklahoma State's defense, is how are they going to cover the tight ends? Obviously, their best linebacker, Colin Oliver, probably their best defensive player overall, was lost for the season, which I think is a big loss, especially in a matchup like this where Utah likes to use, 1, 2, 3, or even 4 tight ends in some packages. How do their linebackers cover the tight ends with all that optionality? I think this is maybe the less interesting matchup, Utah's offense versus Oklahoma State's defense. I think people are not super high in Oklahoma State's defense, and I think Utah's offense will be able to score. I think the game will really be decided on the other side, but I do think that there are some, interesting chess pieces in that matchup as well.
Yeah, I've watched every Oklahoma State game this year and most of the ones from last season, and they haven't played a team with anything close to Utah's tight end room. They've played very talented teams with good offenses, but they're wide receiver based. They're like most teams. I don't think they have any experience with something like a Brant Keithy, Landon King, Caleb Lohner. I just think that's going to be a huge adjustment for them that will yield at least 1 or 2 touchdowns for Utah.
I don't think anyone has experience with the Caleb.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, genuinely, there's 6 guys in that room that could all seriously get quality reps and score touchdowns. We saw Caleb Lohner, Carson Ryan, Keithy, just to name a few, and then Dallin Bentley, Suga Taraga. I mean, it's so deep. It's probably our deepest room on the whole entire team. So yeah, I definitely agree. It'll be an interesting matchup to watch.
Okay, let's move on to the keys to the game. So let's start with Utah. The keys to the game: stop quick passes, control the tempo, and spread the ball around when they're on offense. Landon, any of those three stick out to you?
Yeah, I would love to touch on stop quick passes. I was actually just barely watching a full replay of the Arkansas game before this because Arkansas's defense put up a very good fight, especially in the first half. And the key was they sold out for those quick passes. They were playing press in almost all of the snaps. And when Oklahoma State gets behind the sticks and they have to slow down, think about their plays, their offense, the effectiveness is just completely destroyed. If Utah is able, I think they should play aggressive. If they can shut down those quick passes and get them behind the sticks early, the Oklahoma State offense, the wheels kind of start falling off a little bit.
I do think that's like something that Utah's corners, like even though they lack that experience, they have the athleticism to do that. That's something to watch out for sure. That's exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think my key to the game is it's going to be the same as last week, is just spread the ball around. This is going to be the first full game, knock on wood, that we're going to have Cam for the full thing. It's crazy where this will be a third into the season and we're just now seeing Cam for a full game, or at least
You
that's the game
jinxed it.
plan.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, well, I knocked on wood. I don't think you guys could hear it, but yeah, I mean, I genuinely going to be so vital to have, Mekhi Bernard's got to have 100 yards. I think that's going to be vital. I think Duty's got to have a big game. I hope we scheme packages for him. And then obviously our receiving talent, like Keithy, Dorian Singer, Carson Ryan, Micah Pittman had a catch last game. That was awesome. We have so many weapons out wide. And I think Isaac Wilson really impressed me with how good of a job he was able to do spreading the ball around, especially in that second half. I think
Totally agree.
Rising, will have the potential to do even more with the offensive weapons, and hopefully Ludwig is able to, give the full playbook to Rising. Barring any injury, hopefully he stays in the whole game. I think this could be a really awesome just show of offensive power for Utah.
Well, to kind of like jump onto that with Isaac Wilson spreading the ball, I mean, 9 different players touched the ball, received a catch. Like that's impressive for Utah. That's not doesn't happen very often. I think that's really key. Like Connor was saying, that's a big key.
Yeah, for me, I've been saying this a lot, but controlling the tempo is key. I kind of related it to the USC games we played with the kid USC, where they would jump on us early because they were getting the ball out really quickly. They were getting up to the line fast. Utah's defense was struggling to adjust. But then as soon as we could get a few negative plays, slow down their offense a little bit, make them think about it, the defense settled in and did much better. I feel like that really is the key to me, because if Oklahoma State is dictating this game, Utah's going to be playing catch up. And I don't think Utah really is built to play catch up. They're kind of built to, be a front runner a little bit, get out to a lead and keep it. For Oklahoma State.
Yeah, so one of the keys I wanted to focus on for Oklahoma State was creating big plays. And I kind of almost interpret this on the defensive side of the ball. Their defense as an overall unit is not the best, and statistically, they're not very good at really anything. If they're able to make some key big plays, though, against Utah's offense, that could be an absolute backbreaker. Like, if this is a tight game and you're expecting Utah to be able to drive down and score, and Oklahoma State comes up with a big pick six or a fumble recovery, those are the kind of things that could really swing the tide of the game. Because I don't think Oklahoma State's defense needs to be amazing for the entire game to win this. If they are able to just make big plays in a couple key moments, I think that could be what they need.
Just like the Arkansas game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, a big key to the game is on both sides for Oklahoma State is the line of scrimmage. I think obviously you want Ollie Gordon running miles in your football games. He's a Heisman candidate. He was last year. Obviously not having, like we said, a very productive year this year, but obviously if they can create push against our defensive line, which I'm not sure I'm anticipating them to do, it'll be a long game for Utah. I also think if they can prevent Utah from getting any push up front, Mekhi Bernard is not a very huge brunt back. He's very versatile, but I don't believe that he's super capable of having those big 4th and 2 runs or 3rd and 2s or 3rd and 3s of I think Oklahoma State has a big opportunity there, just because we don't really have a big bruiser back this year. Jalen Glover is probably our closest thing to that, but he hasn't been seeing the field these past couple of weeks. And so I think if again Oklahoma State's defensive line can just really can wreak havoc in the backfield first of all, and prevent Utah's offensive line scheming and run block from being successful, I think that would be a huge win for them.
And for me, we kind of talked about it briefly with Cam Rising maybe playing 3.5 to 4 quarters of football, playing 3 to 4 quarters of football. There's going to be rust there. That's one of those things. Like I hope there isn't. Like I haven't seen a lot of it, but it's bound to happen. And with that rust, will lead to mistakes. And Oklahoma State, they have to capitalize on those mistakes. If Cam Rising throws an interception or two, you have to go down and score off those turnovers. You have to capitalize on the mistakes of the young secondary that Utah has. Like, what if they miss that coverage? Bowman has to get that wide receiver the ball. Just all these things that could happen for Utah with the lack of playing time altogether this season. That could happen. And so when those mistakes are made, Oklahoma State, they need to make those big plays and really need to use those mistakes as a positive for them.
Yeah, I think creating big plays, like we've talked about, is key. Utah State was able to do it with their wide receivers. And I think that, Utah State had some really freaking good wide receivers. And I also think Oklahoma State has some really awesome wide receivers. So I think, kind of taking the top off the defense and keeping them honest and not maybe letting them press up to, stop the quick passes like Utah wants to do will be key. If they can get their wide receivers the ball deep down the field, it's going to make their offense so much more dynamic because Utah's going to have to cover way more. So I think for me, that's a big key for Oklahoma State. Okay, should we move on to the predictions for the game?
Yeah, let's do it.
Perfect. I have the first prediction listed, so I can start us out here. I do think Utah's going to go into Stillwater, come out with a win, 35-24. I have this being a close game. This would be over. The over-under for total points is 51.5, so that would be hitting the over. I do think it's going to be a little bit more scoring than people expect. I do think it's going to be close, though. I don't think Utah's defense is going to be able to, completely shut down Oklahoma State's offense or anything like that. They're going to score. I just think Utah's going to have a little bit of an easier time sustaining drives. I think they'll control the ball. They'll have a lot more time of possession, and I think Utah comes out with a 35-24 victory.
This might be my hottest take of the season with a big win for Utah, 41-24. I truly believe that Cam Rising is special this season. He's going to have one of the best offensive seasons for a quarterback in Utah history. Tanner's talked about it a lot. He wants him to beat the records, and I think Cam wants to beat those records. He wants the most passing touchdowns, most passing yards in Utah history. I truly believe the coaching staff wants him to get that as well. He's just one of those guys. He's a Utah man through and through. And I feel like this is a game where Cam and the Utah offense and the Utah coaching staff is really going to make a statement, especially with Oklahoma State being a team that's right behind them, favored in the Big 12, to go out there and make a statement that they're here, it's their house, and you have to go through them. And going into Stillwater and dominating this game, like I'm expecting and like I'm hoping, it's going to be a big show out for Utah, and I expect Cam Rising to have a dominant game and really show out.
For me, I was the lone State. I know, shocking in a group of Utah fans. Right? Would pick Utah. I think that Utah on a neutral field or at home is more talented than Oklahoma State. I think they have better players overall, and I think the coaching is pretty much identical with Whittingham and Gundy. I have a couple reasons for picking Oklahoma State 31-30 in a super, super tight game. The first is the schematics advantage that I think I've talked about quite a bit. I think Oklahoma State's offense has a really good scheme to beat Utah's defense and to move the ball and to score points. I think they do like the things they like to do are a lot of the things that Utah likes to give up. And so they're going to be really comfortable and in rhythm, I feel like, because 31 points scored on a Utah defense is really difficult to do. That doesn't happen very often. Number two is just the starters have not played that much. It's like we said, Rising has played less than 4 quarters total, and he had a whole year off. It was almost 2 years from, the Rose Bowl to the game this year. And so I think that if any rust at all shows up, it's probably going to happen in the first road game in the year in a hostile environment. And the third reason, is that road game. I think that Utah has always just played a little bit worse on the road. And so, the rust and maybe advantages with scheme, I've got Oklahoma State winning a very, very tight game, 31-30.
Yeah, I'm glad you predicted Oklahoma State to win because I see a much more reasonable path to victory for them than I would probably say any other team on the Utah schedule. The talent of these teams is similar. In order to win this at home, all they need is a couple execution errors from Utah. Maybe we stop ourselves on offense a couple times, which we're absolutely prone to do. I mean, dude, 2 drives with maybe bad play call, some execution errors, and Oklahoma State has it.
Are they really
Yeah.
that similar to Utah in talent? If we look at the talent composite, Utah is clearly ahead of them. Oklahoma State's one of the bottom teams in the Big 12. It's kind of crazy to me to think that again, I do think Oklahoma State's a great team. I think they're coached incredibly. That's their biggest thing. Mike Gundy is one of the best coaches in the country. You can't even argue he is the best coach in the country. But when it comes down to it, I think Utah is just better on nearly every single position that just allows them to win these games. And to kind of just talk about some of the points that Tanner made, I'm not trying to dog on him at all. I just feel like Utah's such a better team on the road than they have been in the past, especially since Cam Rising's been there. We've gone out there, we've gone to USC, we've gone to other teams. Yes, we've struggled against lesser teams like UCLA away and all these teams, but we've really improved on that aspect on the field. I feel like Utah's just a better team through and through. I just don't see a world where we lose this game, personally. And it's just crazy. But it's so I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. My score line doesn't really indicate it, but I'm so 50-50 right down on the fence on this one. I think this is by far and away Utah's hardest game this year. I think there are a couple factors. I am predicting a Utah victory, no matter how much my gut is telling me not to. Just because Tanner, like he said, on the road, Utah has a history of not playing amazing. And specifically against this Oklahoma State team, there's a bunch of Big 12 mojo. It's going to be the first conference game ever for, a team, and I just hope we're ready. I think 35-24, I don't know if that scoreline is going to be that big. Now that I'm looking at it, I anticipate it being a lot closer of a game. But I will say my mind, it kind of goes back to in 2021. I don't know if you guys remember, we played Arizona the week before we played Oregon. We hosted number 3 Oregon. And that Arizona game in 2021, we almost lost that game. I think we the final score was 35-28 or 39-28. Anyway, it went down to the wire. And Cam was playing in that one. So, but then we proceeded to come out at home at Rice Eccles and completely blow the socks off of Oregon, the number 3 rated team in the country. I'm thinking it's a similar response here. We kind of got punched in the mouth on the road against Utah State, and I'm glad, like I said earlier in the podcast, I'm glad that happened because I think it's important for this team to face some adversity, to trail for the first time this season. I think that was huge. But I'm expecting Cam Rising, and I'm expecting Scally, and I'm expecting pretty much everybody to put on a performance that will make a statement in the Big 12, because I think if we win this game, it sets the tone for the rest of the league. And like I said before, I think this is by far and away the toughest road challenge, and I think the toughest challenge of the season. I think if we come out and perform like we can, execute like we can, I think Utah by far and away, if we're executing and performing our talent and just the way our offense and defense looks, I think we're by far and away the favorite to win the conference. We were the preseason favorite, and I think we'll show that on Saturday.
I do agree that the talent gap is there. I don't think it's as big as the 247 composite for sure, but I do think there is, which is why I said, at home or neutral site, I think Utah's a bigger favorite because I think Utah's favored by 2 points right now, which, 3 points for home field would be, 5 points on a neutral site, and we'd probably be favored by 8 at home or something. So I do think that is really an interesting thought there. I do think that there are more ways for Utah to win because I'm not sure that Oklahoma State's defense will be able to stop Utah's offense below like a certain point. Like I think Utah is a pretty safe bet to get to at least 28 points here. And I think there are more ways for Utah's defense to stop Oklahoma State's offense than for Oklahoma State's defense to stop Utah's offense is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's like the main mismatch I identified as well. It seems like Utah's problems, any matchup problem is like potentially fixable, but I just don't see how you could fix an entire team's defense that's been bad for honestly all of last season as well, and they returned almost everyone, and their best defensive player got injured. It doesn't seem fixable to me.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on the predictions, or should
I think I'm good.
Let's move on over. Okay, so for last week, we all missed our predictions. I think that, that Utah State game was extremely hard to read. Landon missed on less than 20 pass attempts. Ethan missed on Dijon Stanley over 100 all-purpose yards. I missed on Utah State being held under 7.5 points badly. And then Connor missed on over 4.5 team sacks. I think not a banner week for us.
I think it really comes down to none of us expected Utah to be playing from behind for the first half of the game. Like, if Utah had jumped out to an early lead like I thought they would, I think Isaac for sure would have had less than 20 pass attempts, but, like, literally being down 2 scores in the first half, you have to start passing, especially when the run wasn't working. So I feel like that's kind of where my prediction got cooked.
If any one of these didn't hit, I'm glad it was Isaac Wilson's. I'm glad it was.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Oh, me too. Yeah, it was nice to see him throw 33 times.
Of course, other ones does suck, but
Stanley was close to hitting. He had 2 drops on wheel routes that one of them he could have potentially broken for like a 60 to 70 yard touchdown, and the other could have been like 20 to 30 brutal. Yards. Like that Stanley one could have hit if not for 2 drops.
Yeah, that wasn't a perfect throw on the wheel, but it was good enough.
I don't know if close is the right word. He had 5 total yards, so I was quite off, but I do see where you're coming from.
Okay, let's move on to our locks that we are predicting for. Landon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can start out. So Ollie Gordon's actually only had 1 game this year over 100 yards. That was against South Dakota State, and I believe he had 30 carries in that game. I don't think that he's going to be able to rush for over 100 against Utah. He was a little bit below 50 against Arkansas and Tulsa, although he didn't play much for Tulsa. I just don't think they're going to be able to run the ball. I think that trend is going to continue. And I'm not saying he has a bad game. I'm just saying that I don't think he's going to have a super efficient or high volume game.
For me, Dorian Singer over 75 receiving yards. Last week, he was targeted, I believe. Let me just triple check before I continue. I don't know. I don't have the targets, but he had 5 receptions for 66 yards. A few of those, I think he had 1 or 2 passes that would have been for more if the pass was just slightly better. But then we saw a little bit in the Baylor game, the start. Cam was looking towards Singer a lot. That slightly overthrown ball deep in the for Singer in the first drive, and then as Utah continued to score, and then Cam getting injured, obviously kind of closed the playbook. I do think Oklahoma State is the perfect team to open that playbook, and I think Dorian Singer is a key piece for that. And so I feel like he's going to get over 75 yards and get quite a few targets from Cam Rising.
For me, my prediction is over 50, which is the current at all the sports books. To me, this is honestly like feels like a lot because I think that this is going to be a high scoring game. I don't really see like a defensive slugfest here. I think both teams' offenses are going to move.
And then for me, mine's pretty simple. I think we're gonna have over 1.5 turnovers generated. I don't think Ollie Gordon or any of their backs are gonna fumble, although they could. I think this is by far and away the best secondary, even though we're injured. I think this is by far and away the best secondary that Oklahoma State's faced this year. And I think there's definitely going to be opportunities to pick off Alan Bowman to make him uncomfortable in the pocket and hopefully make some stupid decisions.
Great. Yeah, let us know in the comments what you guys think is the most likely, least likely week. See how they turn out. Okay, should we move on to the Big 12 weekly power ratings?
Let's do
Let's
it.
do it.
So how we compile these is we all put together our 1 to 16 blind, so we're not influenced by each other's results, and then we average the rank of it and go from there. So let's start with Utah. We can go quickly because we've talked obviously a lot about Utah. Anyone have any thoughts about Utah rank number 1 they want to share?
I just think they have the highest ceiling of any team in the conference, paired with experience and a good coach.
Yeah, nothing else really to say. I think that's the consensus.
I'd like to see whoever put lowest rank 4 to talk about, see why.
Yeah, for me, the only reason I put them at 4 is because I think Kansas State, UCF, and Oklahoma State have just shown more. I think that Utah, with time and rising back, can probably get back to the number 1 spot, but like at some point, like I can't just keep expecting Rising to like be playing all the time because like we've thought that for a long time. What if he gets knocked out in the Oklahoma State game? And so for me, Utah can move quickly back up, but I just had to put him down a bit because I couldn't justify keeping him at 1.
Yeah, for me, kind of just, I don't want to spend too long on it, but I rank it a little bit differently where I'm just kind of looking at neutral field favorability. Like Utah's favored over Oklahoma State right now, even at Oklahoma State. And so in my mind, I'm power rating them higher.
Okay, let's move on to Kansas State. I think probably the most impressive one in the destroying Arizona 31-7. They were 2.25, so pretty close to Utah as far as the average rank goes. Any thoughts on Kansas State?
I had Kansas State at 2. I think they have a very good running back room with DJ Giddens and Dylan Edwards. I think that's extremely solid. Their defenses looked good. Avery Johnson has some more development needed, but he's playing at a serviceable level, especially paired with the depth and the running game they have.
I had Kansas State. I had them the lowest. I had them at 4. And honestly, it wasn't even the fact that I don't think they're a bad team at all. I think they're honestly excellent. The win against Arizona was incredible. For me, I kind of take into account kind of what Landon talked about, how it's neutral field, and I also take into account like what I saw the previous weeks. At Iowa State last week at 2, and I couldn't drop them 2 spots for me after a bye week. I had one person jump them, and so that was my reasoning behind 4. Like in all reality, a big win against BYU at BYU could jump them to 4 again, jump them up to second, even to the first this week.
Yeah, nothing else from me really. I think Avery Johnson played decent. He played well enough. He fairly efficient, 14 of 23, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then 110 yards on the ground. He's impressed me. I do agree with Lennon. I think I'd like to see the passing game develop a little bit more. But I think Kansas State's a great team.
Okay, let's move on to UCF. UCF obviously raised TCU. That was one of the best games I watched this. I think their run game is extremely impressive, and then their run stop. Yeah, and then their run stop on defense is also good. Kind of the weakness, it's funny, is throwing the ball and stopping the pass. But, for me, I think they're talented enough that I had them at number 3, I think exactly. So this seems right to me.
Yeah, I think RJ Harvey is the best running back in the Big 12. I would take him over Ollie Gordon. I just think overall...
Maybe in the country.
Maybe in the country. He's just harder to stop. He's more versatile. He can catch out of the backfield. He can pass protect. He's extremely fast. He's hard to bring down. UCF they have a 2-headed monster with KJ Jefferson running too. Like, don't forget that guy is 265 pounds running out of the backfield. that just wears teams down. They just kept leaning and leaning on TCU and just wore them down.
Yeah, I'm super impressed with RJ Harvey. 30 carries, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns is just insanely efficient against a team like TCU. I don't know. I think they've looked super impressive so far. KG Jefferson kind of had a bounce back game. 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think they're on the up and up.
For UCF, I think they're one of the most balanced teams in the conference. They have a pretty decent passing attack, excellent run game, and then just a wide receiver one that's just difficult to stop in Hudson. I had them at 2. They're one of the better teams in Big 12.
Oklahoma State at 4 kind of rounds out that first tier, I think, as you can see kind of by what we rank them on average. We don't have to talk a lot about them, but I think that they're, really good on offense, questionable on defense, but definitely one of the better teams in the Big 12.
Yeah, well coached, experienced. They have a proven method to win games, and they win close games.
Yeah, Mike Gundy. That's all there is to say.
Okay. The next tier is kind of TCU, Iowa State, and Arizona State. They're all kind of bunched up there in that, kind of 5 to 7 range. Any thoughts on those 3 teams from you guys?
I wasn't sold on Josh Hoover for TCU until that UCF game. I really think he's rounded into form. He still is a very young player, and TCU has a lot of talent. Sonny Dykes is a good coach. I think TCU is on track to have a much better year than last season. They got extremely unlucky with one possession games, and I think that they're going to have some progression to the mean there where they're going to win some of those, even though they did lose against UCF just barely.
Yeah, that's a brutal one, yeah.
That's so brutal, but they just look like a much better, more balanced team than most teams in the Big 12.
Yeah, I'd like to chat about ASU. They won a scary one against Texas State at Texas State. Texas State, I can't remember who they beat. Was it Oklahoma State that they beat a year or two
Baylor.
ago?
They blew
They
Baylor out.
destroyed
They
Baylor.
literally
That's
blew
right.
them
It was
out.
like 45 to like 17 or something.
It was
That's
like a
actually
physical
crazy.
show of force. It was insane.
They were on
Yeah.
the road too. They were at Baylor, and they destroyed them.
That's the game I remember from Texas State. So, I think they're definitely one of the better teams. I think Arizona State, the fact that they won this game, an away game, I think it's similar to the Oklahoma State, South Dakota State win. I think it's impressive nonetheless.
I think Texas State's much better. Sorry to interrupt, but I think Texas State's
No,
a
you're
lot
good.
better.
I agree. I think they're a solid team all around. I was really impressed with Jordan Tyson. He had 120 yards, 6 receptions, and a touchdown. Scadaboo had 24 carries, 62 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Just big bruiser guy. We've talked a lot about him in past videos. Just really impressed with this ASU team.
I like to talk about like how Iowa State continues to be the most polarizing team in our rankings. I still have them high. I have them at 3. I really believe in Rocco Becht. I really love their wide receiver room with Noel and their running back room. It definitely is weak. It's a lot weaker than past. But I think Rocco Becht really like subsidizes that. If that's the right word. Kind of just takes that away, and really with how well he's played this year. That bye week limits their statistics, but they do look really well. I do think it's an interesting game. I would love to see a neutral field against Arizona State, because I feel like that would be a really fun game.
I think Iowa State is really good at everything, but not great at anything.
Yeah.
Like they're consistent across the board. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Arizona. Obviously not a great showing. They got completely decimated by Kansas State on the road. Really, their offense is kind of a one-trick pony. It's just Fafita to McMillan, and if that's not open, they really are terrible at everything else. I think the coaching has been quite a huge downgrade from Fish, honestly. I mean, they hired a guy that has a career 40% win percentage. I mean, I don't know that they were expecting to improve.
Yeah, I mean, that hurts a lot to see a team go from like significantly above average coached to like significantly below average. Like I would think that they're one of the worst coach teams in the Big 12 currently.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for sure because it really is Fafita and T-Mac against the world. And I think their defense just was not great at all. No, not a good showing. Not one bit against Kansas State. I don't know. It was just kind of a physical domination too. I noticed in that game, Kansas State just really took control of that game and never looked back. I think I don't want to say Fafita's having a sophomore slump because he's still an impressive player, and T-Mac obviously with him, you can never count them out. But no touchdown throws for Fafita this game. I think you line Arizona up with a quality opponent, and I think they kind of crumble.
Mm-hmm.
Something that
Exactly.
was interesting is, do you guys remember playing Washington last year? We were at the 1 yard line and we did the slowest developing handoff at all time
Oh,
and we got a safety. Do you guys remember
Yeah.
that?
that
Yes.
was,
Oh
dude, I
yeah,
was screaming at my TV, begging them to freaking call a timeout because they were
Love it.
Everyone
literally
could
had
see
a
it coming.
they had a heavy blitz right off tackle where we were gonna try and run the ball, and we just ran it right into that blitz.
But my point is that every Arizona handoff was like that in this game. They were all so slow developing. Their running back, by the linemen have been blocking for 3 seconds by the time the running back gets the ball. And like that offensive coordinator they hired, Dino Babers, is the dude is from the Stone Age. Like
He's
the game is
terrible. He's so
the game
bad.
passed him by. Like the game has passed him by. And like I get they don't have like a high budget, but like you got to go find someone at the FCS or G5 level that is up to date with things that are happening to run offense,
He must have been a Ludwig pupil down at Vandy.
right?
Dude, is Connor Stallions the answer for Arizona head coach?
Has to be.
gotta be.
I think it could work.
Film room's
Okay.
gonna be electric, boys.
Right. Okay, let's move on to the second tier of Big 12 teams, second page. Colorado and Baylor were tied for ninth. Colorado coming off beating Colorado State, and Baylor coming off of a loss to Utah and then dominating Air Force. Any thoughts on either of these teams?
I
I
think
think
Colorado
Baylor's a
is.
team.
Sorry,
Oh,
you
go
go.
ahead.
You go.
Okay. I think Baylor's a team that obviously they came out second game of the season having to play Utah at a hostile environment. I think there just wasn't a lot to write home about. It's always a tough situation when you have to play Utah second game of the season. Like I said, it's just never ideal. I know that DeQuan Finn is just it's been a little bit of it's been rough sailing, especially that Utah game. He went 9-21. But I do truly see them pulling it together. Dave Aranda is such a good coach. People forget he was the defensive coordinator for the best college team of all time, in my opinion, that 2019 LSU team. Although their defense wasn't like super duper dominant, wasn't anything compared to their offense. They still had a super solid defense, and I think Baylor. This is kind of a time for Aranda to prove what he's getting paid is worth it because, I think the 2021 they made was it the Sugar Bowl that they played in? I know they made a New Year's Six,
Yeah.
and ever since
Mhm.
It was
then it's
either the
just been
sugar or cotton. Is one of
yeah.
those two.
And ever since then, they've just kind of been sliding down the slippery slope of being 5-7, 6-6, just not a super productive team. And I think Baylor's a team that has been good in years past. Obviously, the RG3 years, it's kind of disappointing to see where they're at now. But I do think that if they can get the quarterback situation figured out with DeQuan Finn and start building around him, I think there is potential for a turnaround.
I
Well, it's
think they're
interesting.
pretty underrated. Like I think
Mhm.
that Utah's defense was the best they're going to face all year, and like they're never going to look like that on offense again. Like they're always going to be better than what they gave the Utah game.
Totally agree. Totally
And I
agree.
think that they have one of the best defenses in the Big 12. Like I'm pretty impressed by them. Like I think they've got the players and the scheme, and it's a good defense. It's one of the better ones, I think.
Yeah, I was
Mhm.
keeping up with like Baylor fans' reactions after the game. I think they'll learn as many Pac-12 fans did. When you play Utah at home, it's always ugly. Even if it's a close game, you never feel good about how your team played. And it doesn't mean your team's bad. Utah has a very, very good defense, especially at home. And like I don't think that it says a ton about Baylor's offense or them as a team because of how that game went.
What's interesting, you talk about like Daquan Finn. Like he didn't play against Air Force. It was Sawyer Robertson.
Was that injury or was that benching?
I don't
It was
know. That's my
benching.
question.
Is benching?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to have Colorado and Baylor tied for ninth here because obviously they're playing this week. They'll kind of show off kind of what's happening, like who's going to take that leap. And kind of talking about Colorado, I think they're very similar to Arizona, where it's Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter on the offense. They do have a little
Jimmy
bit more
Horn
weapons.
is nice too.
Yeah, they do have a little bit more weapons. Jimmy Horn is great, but if those guys aren't open and Shedeur Sanders doesn't have time to get it to him, that team's not very good, and that defense is still pretty bad. And so it's very interesting. I think this coming week is going to be fun to watch that Baylor Colorado game. Just
Yeah,
because
I actually think that's a huge game for both teams.
it's very similar to honestly, it's the lesser of the Oklahoma State Utah game, where Baylor's defense is probably their best asset, and then Colorado is the offense. And I'm excited to see kind of which of those two sides of the ball wins that game.
Okay, let's move on to talk about let's go with these teams in a group. BYU or West Virginia, both at 11 or 12. Really not much debate about. As you can see, the high strength 13 or 14. Anyone have any thoughts on either of these teams?
Yeah, I don't think either team has too much talent. I think these teams do have some upside. I just don't think they really have the talent or the full team they need to put it together and have like a really successful season.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the consensus for both these teams, like you were saying, Landon. I think for BYU, they actually did impress me quite a bit with that Wyoming victory. On the road, it's never easy to go play, the Cowboys up in Wyoming. It just never is. So the fact that they blew them out, I think, is impressive. Retzlaff played probably is arguably his best game this season. Although, there were some misses in that game. 22-36, almost 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. I think he's starting to develop a little bit. Chase Roberts is a dog, 6 receptions, 130 yards. I think BYU offensively is kind of starting to come into their own. I'm not saying that they're great or even good by any means, because it was Wyoming. But it will be interesting, to see, to kind of watch them throughout the season. I think West Virginia, I just haven't seen enough from them yet, because obviously the Penn State game, blowout game, and it's just kind of tough. You're playing the number 10 team in the country. They blew out Albany, and then they play another P5 in Pittsburgh, huge rivalry, and they just come up short. So, yeah, I need to see a little bit more. I think when they have 6 games under their belt, I'm going to have a much better idea of where they actually sit in the power rankings.
I think BYU, this is like their first real test in Kansas State this week. Like, it kind of shows out who they really are. Like, can they do anything against them? That's like where my metric will be. Their offensive line has looked absolutely terrible. And so if they can protect Retzlaff enough where they can actually have a decent game against Kansas State, they're probably a lot better than I give them credit for. But the thing is, I have seen nothing that their offensive line has improved at all. And I don't think they're going to be able to improve any at all versus Kansas State. And Kansas State's going to have an easy field day, and they're going to be stuck here at 11 for a long time.
Yeah, I don't think BYU has really played a team with a pulse yet. I think getting to 3-0, I think is a really good accomplishment for them, especially going on the road and winning at SMU. But really, I think their offense, like Ethan said, I think the offensive line really limits what their offense can do. They have no run game whatsoever, and it's all relying on Retzlaff really throwing to receivers who are not that open and kind of chunking it up that way. I think the defense is very fundamentally sound, which is a credit to Jay Hill. As we know, he's an incredible coach, but I just don't think they really have a lot of talent. I think the scheme and the solidness will get you through a lot of the games, especially versus teams that, are just a disaster offensively, which is all 3 teams BYU's played. But I think against good teams like Kansas State, scheme can only take you so far. You have to have some talent too. And I just think they're pretty deficient in that area.
And BYU is always impressive in the beginning of the season. As the season goes on, the P5 schedule grind is going to get to them, and they just don't have that depth yet. It's going to be hard to get that depth in general for them, and so we'll see kind of where they'll land at the end of the year. Like I said, I think 11 is a pretty decent spot for them, all being said.
Okay, anyone have any thoughts on any of the bottom 4 teams? We can probably go pretty quickly.
Yeah. Houston, I only have them ranked. I think I was the one who had them at 11. Keeping it close with Oklahoma impressed me, but that's really it.
And I think UNLV is not a terrible loss anymore. UNLV's good.
It doesn't look that bad.
Well, UNLV is an excellent team. I really think they're going to be a powerhouse in the Mountain West this year if they can keep it close with Boise State. I mean, they could be They could be going bowling. For me, Kansas, they're one of those teams. It's like, wow, like they're like the FSU of the Big 12 so far, like the biggest shocker. Like, what are they doing? Like, Jalen Daniels does not look like Jalen Daniels. Devin Neal just can't get it going consistently, and that defense just does not look that good.
Yeah, that was my big takeaway. Kansas is terrible. Like genuinely just like
Yeah,
a terrible team. Zero offensive like power. I think Jalen Daniels looked terrible.
he's actually
I think
fraudulent, unfortunately.
I genuinely think that if Kansas State, if he either doesn't turn it around next game like ASAP, I think Kansas is actually going to go have to grab figure out with the backup QB because he's that bad.
Dude, they
Like
lost
he did
Jason
not
Bean,
look
though.
good.
The guy that's been
Jason
saving
Bean-
them. He was a dog.
And he actually is in the NFL. Like he's stuck on like an NFL. Like he's like legitimate. Like he's better than Jalen.
I agree. That would have been a super hot take like a month ago, but then we actually started playing the games, and it's like, oh wait, Jalen Daniels has actually never beaten a ranked team or had a good game against like an actual good team.
It is quite interesting. Like, when you think of Jalen Daniels, you think of, oh, he's one of the better quarterbacks in the country. He's great, but never beating a ranked team in his history is pretty interesting. I will like to ask you guys' thoughts because I honestly completely negated this and forgot. Cincinnati beat Pitt and West Virginia lost to them. Does that have any correlation with your ranking? Because it didn't for me. Because I honestly
Cincinnati lost to Pitt, didn't they?
Well, they beat Pitt, I thought. Or am I
Oh,
crazy?
I'm pretty sure they
Let me
lost.
check
no,
and
you're right.
verify.
No,
I think
you're
they
right.
lost.
I read it wrong. My bad. Forget everything I just said. But anyways, they kept it closer than
Yeah.
West Virginia. That's something
I
to
like
consider.
Cincinnati's quarterback, Brendan Sorsby. I think he's pretty good, but it's just everything else is still kind of in disarray.
Yeah.
And
I
then
think
Texas Tech is just
I think especially going back to I have one more point. Like it's kind of like talent shows through, and like Kansas has been like playing way above their talent in their recruiting for like a long time. But like you can't do that forever. Like that catches up to you. Like you actually have to like recruit. And like Kansas just they haven't had that, 5-year build up where they've recruited depth. Like they have a couple good players and the guys behind that are like not P5 level recruits. So like it catches up to you eventually.
I think people are taking them seriously now as well. I think that people are bringing better game plans against them because Kansas is one of the worst Power 5 programs historically in football. I just think that the lack of depth and then teams probably trying a bit harder against them is starting to show through.
Do you think Texas Tech has any potential to rise the next coming weeks? Because they've
No.
been our
They
worst
look
team
so
the last
bad.
2 weeks.
They're awful. Awful.
Well,
I think
such
they
an
have the
interesting
worst
thing.
defense in the Big 12 by a lot. Like that defense sucks. Like that's worse than college.
I agree
Defensive.
with you. Like, how do you come back from all 11 players on your defense being wildly below average? Like, you just have such a long road ahead of you to improve.
It's just I feel like it's just over for them this season. Just pack it up, Texas Tech. They're officially stuck at 16. Hard stuck at 16 until they actually
They gotta do
I don't think there's
something.
anything they can do. I don't think they're gonna win more than 4 games this season. Like
Well, they're
I think there's a few teams that could drop. I think Houston, Cincinnati, or Kansas could all drop below Texas Tech. I think Texas Tech has mobility to 13 at the highest.
I do like their quarterback. I do think he's pretty good. Their offense isn't bad. Like they can score points, but it's like you guys said, that defense is something that is.
I think they can score on the bad teams because their scheme is like really like junky and like they just throw deep to their guys. Like it's like
I guess
it's not really like an actual offense. It's more like a high school offense, which is like how I would say.
Such an interesting fact. They were such high choices for so many teams, so many players, so many people this year for to win the Big 12. I saw a lot of people talking about them to start the year, and they have looked awful.
I think their biggest problem is Joey McGuire just can't coach. Like he's just a bad coach.
He's
like
a recruiter.
Had decent talent. Yeah, but like he's like the way worse version of like Mario Cristobal.
He's what people think Mario Cristobal is, but he's not as good of a recruiter.
Cristobal still sucks. I'll die on that hill. I hate that man. I don't know why.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so the question last week was, can you list the 3 rivalry games for Utah? And Ethan, I'll let you take it from here.
Yep. We had Utah versus BYU, Utah versus Utah State, and Utah versus Colorado. If you want to, I had them animated, Landon. So if you want to click on, they'll appear for the Utah versus BYU. Pretty well known. It's the Holy War. Everyone knows this. Then you had Utah versus Utah State just this week, the Battle of the Brothers, and then probably one of the lesser known rivalries in the Big 12 is Utah Colorado. The Pac-12 really tried to push this. It didn't really ended up being a really big rivalry. I think Colorado beat Utah once in the 12 years they played, but it was pretty exciting to kind of see a comment here. Let me see if his name. It's DBGII77. He commented. It's the first comment
Let's
that
go.
came out, and he got all 3 right. So shout out to him. And then this week our question, it's a multiple choice. So let's list down what one you think it is. It's how many players have been drafted by the Utes in their program history. You got A with 97, B with 177, C with 134, or D with 209. Just leave a comment with what letter or the number, and you'll be featured as one of the comments if you get it right. Just like our guy this week. I'll even take a screenshot of the comment and post it up here as well. And so you'll be able to see it out. It would be pretty exciting. Just let us know what you think.
Okay, any final thoughts before I end the podcast?
One final thought. I
Not
think
for me.
that Utah versus Oklahoma State is the biggest Big 12 game this year, regular season. And potentially, if Utah ends up with only 1 loss and Oklahoma State gets in undefeated, and say like Kansas State with 1 loss has some sort of tiebreaker on us, this could be more important than the Big 12 championship. Like, this could potentially be the Big 12 championship this week. So I think it's absolutely a critical game for both teams.
Good point.
Big time matchup. Be excited.
Let's go Utes, baby.
Any thoughts, Connor? I
Um,
think you had something.
yeah, I think arguably, I don't know if this is a super hot take, maybe Oklahoma State, Kansas State, but I think this is by far and away the most anticipated matchup of college football. But obviously in the Big 12, I think, as Josh Pate coins the Big 12, it's America's conference, and I think whoever comes out on top of this game, I think, is going to have pretty easy sledding to 11-1 or 12-0, especially Utah, because they dodged Kansas State this year. I think it's a battle of powerhouses, and I'm excited to watch the Gundy versus Witt chess match unfold.
I definitely think this will be like the Big 12 matchup with the most, probably the highest ratings outside of maybe like a crazy like Colorado, because Colorado gets crazy ratings.
True.
Like this, do you think this could end up being one of the I don't know, bigger rivalries in the Big 12? This come around with Utah and the 4 Corners schools with Utah, Oklahoma State.
I think it'll be interesting to see like how rivalries develop, because we have no history with any of these teams, and so 1 year doesn't make a rivalry. I think that it'll just take time to see.
These 2 teams are just so similar when it comes to history about success and everything. It's very interesting because there's a mutual respect between both. I think both programs, just because of the Mike Gundy, Kyle Whittingham situation. I'll be intrigued to see what the years to come, what comes from it, especially with these 2 coaches considering retirement in the next five so years.
Okay. Thank you all for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Even if you think you're subscribed, just check it to make sure. It really helps us out. Comment on the videos. Tell us if we're Utah homers. Tell us if we're giving Oklahoma State too much respect. We love to interact with you guys on that. And we will see you next week to recap the game. Go Utes!